It's interesting, it's online when you look up to the gods. Right, welcome back. The next item, 10.2, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development the fourth quarter monitoring report. Hamish.
Kia ora. Good morning, Mr Mayor and elected members. The report before you today is our regular quarterly update on activity across the district and some key indicators relating to housing, primarily for the fourth quarter. So this follows up the two recent reports we did earlier a month or so back, catching us up after our focus on the growth strategy, and this is for the period for 1st of March to the 31st of May, which is the most recent information we've had. So I've taken the liberty of preparing a bit of a presentation to go through the key findings, just to provide some context around them, rather than just seeing numbers on a page and that. And some of the graphs will be a little bit familiar with you, but just to emphasise that a lot of this is just pulling out the numbers. There's a little bit of context around them, but it doesn't go into the depth of these reports about the wider economic analysis and what's going on in the market. But hopefully there's enough there that you can make some links with currently what you hear through the media and other things, and I will make some anecdotal links as we go through there as well. But first of all, I'm just focusing on resource consents. And just to remind, resource consents, not every development necessarily needs a resource consent. If it can meet the requirements of the district plan, it can go through the process. For instance, a new build might not actually require resource consent, but resource consents are quite important for us where they are required. And in particular, what it does help us do is capture subdivision consents which come in, which is where you're basically subdividing one parcel into other parcels which do come in. So interestingly, there's a couple of things I've shown on this graph long term from back in 2018 through to current, just to show a bit of long-term trend analysis. The latest figures we have there are that our resource consents have increased slightly up to 80. And a key bit of data that we've started collecting since March 2018 is that net additional dwellings. So what we actually do from those consents that come in, we look at each and every consent and go through it just to see actually where a new potential dwelling has been created. A lot of them actually, the resource consents actually relate to things like putting a fence up or retaining or something like that, where it might not meet one of the district plan rules. So there's a lot that aren't related to development specifically of new builds, so we go through and break those out. And that's actually what those the bar chart there, the net additional capacity, and it's potential capacity, because while it's coming through for consent, there's never any guarantee on when, where or if it'll get built out. So it's kind of the early and first stage in the development cycle for us to get an indication of what might be coming through the pipeline. So the two graphs there are the consent numbers in the dark blue, and you can see tracking along there anywhere between 50 and in and around 70 to 80 is kind of like a regular median that we have, and you can see some cyclical up and downs there, and you'll see that with some of the other graphs too, where it tends to dip in the March or kind of post-Christmas period and peaking in the middle of the year, so no surprise with the holidays there that's the cyclical up and down as everyone has a break. And then looking at the net additions there, one of the key trends of interest is just since about March 2020 onwards, you can see about halfway through the graph, you can actually see our net additions have started picking up a bit, and quite consistently so. So we're actually getting net addition potential dwellings up into the 50 to over 100 kind of capacity every quarter coming through. And again, just a caveat, that doesn't mean they all get built, but that's people out there who are looking to subdivide and put a house on the back of their section, or some of those larger subdivisions that are coming through, some up to 50 plus capacity across the parts of the district. And just to note from our prior reporting, that September 21 big blip in there, that actually relates and captures the development of, I think it was the Somerset retirement home, the one up in Waikanai. It actually went through the fast track process, the government's fast track process, but that was looking to create, I think it's around 290 odd dwellings in and of itself. So that's contributes to that significant bump there. But you can see even December last year was quite a healthy number of potential dwellings, in the 159, that is, before dropping back down to 66 in the most recent. So that's just to provide a bit of context about our resource consents. And of course, the next layer of information that we have that's really helpful is building consents. Now, building consents are a bit closer to the action happening. So building consent usually is for most buildings that come through, unlike resource consents, which capture a lot but not all. A building consent is typically required on the particularly housing and buildings for just about all of them, if not all of them. So it's actually another good indicator as people come in and apply for them. It's usually when they're getting ready to get into the action. But again, not necessarily all of them come through straight away, or there's not 100%, but it's a very high percentage, so it's a good indicator. And also, just to kind of caveat this slide before I get into it, this doesn't actually then tell us about how long it takes or the time period that it takes to then actually build the consent. That information is a bit harder to get, and I know that comes back to some of what's going on in the market at the moment. But what this slide does help show us overall is if we look at the dark blue line up top there, to start with, we can see that that's the total number of building consents from quarter to quarter since March 2018. And we can see there again that cyclical up and down with peaks in December every year, pretty much. And if you think back to the other one, obviously following December's like holiday period, so that's where those drops typically correspond, with people obviously getting all their work and that in before the year, going on holiday and then cracking into the building. And then again, once everyone's back in action at the start of the year, you'll typically see consent numbers build up to mid-year period as well. So long term, we can see a couple of additions in there that I've added is the COVID lines, roughly indicating when the first lockdown and second lockdown came in, just because I think that came up in our last round of discussions about what the impacts have been. So I know there's other impacts going on about the supply side, which again is not indicated in these numbers, but this is just the numbers coming in. It is quite interesting. You can see the first lockdown appears to be, and this is all anecdotally, but you can see there appears to be a regular kind of pattern. You know, it was that time of year where it was leading to the downward bottom of activity before peaking up again. But the most interesting one is the most recent lockdown that we had, where you can see there's actually been a plateauing across of quite high activity with the building consents as well before they've actually dropped down over our typical peak and drop. So I could only speculate as to what that means, but it might have been people taking the time and effort to actually get their projects ready and get them in and underway to start hitting the ground, is what those numbers would suggest. Now, we know since those numbers, because this is back in 2021, the market was quite a lot of demand going on, a lot of pressures and other things, but since then we're all aware that the supply side constraints have started kicking in, the supplies of jib and others that we've heard in the media. So that's the practical things that are potentially playing out and what's happened with those numbers actually coming to fruition on the ground. The other interesting thing about this graph is the bottom two just compare additions versus new builds. So the I want to say the lighter blue, for those online, hopefully the colours have come through, but there's a more vibrant blue is our new builds. And you can see there that the new build numbers have actually started to rack up quite consistently and quite considerably, again since that September 2020 period, and a kind of sustained period of numbers coming through for the new builds. Again, the interesting thing is to show that while there is additions activity, which is the lighter blue, and you can see that those peak. A point I've always kind of identified is that additions activity is actually quite important for Kapiti. Traditionally, we've had a lot of smaller houses, you could say undersized houses, and there has been a lot of activity in that space where people have looked to upgrade or add capacity to 2-bedroom houses to make them 3 bedrooms, put in sleep outs. So that's quite important when we look at actually what the capacity increases on the ground, as well as looking at both new builds and additions. So getting back to some of the stuff that we hear a bit more about and where some of the pressures have been in our district is the medium house sales price. This is always one, just to flag that this information going on is from national information, so you might be hearing more recent stuff from QV and in the markets, and this is based till the end of March. Is the latest data we have available that we use for this reporting, but we have been hearing other figures in that out there that kind of reflect this. But you can see there, just historically, stepping back first, you can see we've had significant growth and periods of growth and increase up until 2007, where there was a bit of a plateau post GFC and leading into GFC, where things kind of tailored off and stayed pretty consistent before things really started ramping up from about 2015 onwards. And you can see there's a couple of periods in there where things have really ratcheted up with that demand and pressure as the supply of housing wasn't really keeping up with overall demand, is a fair reflection in that medium house price. But you can see the latest figures, we've actually fallen back from a peak from the last period, was revised up slightly to just over, I think it was 901,000 was the median price for the period, when's that, to December was the peak, and now we've fallen back a bit. And that seems to reflect consistently, if you hear the commentators and some of the figures coming out from the wider market at the moment, a lot of the gains through the 2020 year, they've been saying we've fallen back to where we were at the tail end of 2021. So that kind of reflects in that movement around the median house price movement at the moment. So again, that equates with the number of houses sold. Again, there's been a lot in the media lately, but just again looking historically, and I've got a graph that compares a couple of two different graphs together, which is quite helpful to understand some of the changes over time. But you can see there during the late 90s and mid 2000s, anywhere between 400 to 500 odd sales, dropping obviously GFCs, that big drop in the middle there, where we get down, and then the numbers started to creep up a bit, but they're plateauing significantly below where they were pre-GFC. And then I guess the most recent market changes, there's been a bit of a kind of decline where people are looking, there's a bit of an upwards here to about 2015, and then you can see there's actually a gradual decline. And that decline, I'll show you a comparison graph at the moment, but that actually corresponds quite a lot to obviously the changes in median sales prices. So as prices have gone up, there seems to be a close relationship with sales. But just coming back to the latest figures that kind of reflect what you might be hearing a lot in the media is the latest house sales have actually fallen to 76 for the last quarter to the end of March. But I will just caveat that significant drop is quite often lagged information as well. So it's actually dependent on when lawyers actually register sales that they're required to do and through the process. So quite often this one will get revised up. So I would still expect to see when it gets updated for the next quarter's information that maybe the sales are a little bit higher than what they're showing there, but still showing a drop, just reflecting what we're hearing in the wider market. So this next graph kind of just actually helps bring the two together, and hopefully it provides a bit more of that understanding of those long-term trends. So you can see there, starting from back in 1993, this one, you can see there's some healthy sale numbers there when houses were down around, what's that, just under, under median sale prices were well down under $100,000, and it's pretty hard to imagine actually, being that low. But then as we kind of ratchet up, GFC there in the middle, you can see that's where the plateau starts happening around median sale prices, but also the sales plummet, and then the market starts recovering a little bit as prices go up. And then you can say that there's a market shift here. When's that? In about 2017, as that price starts cranking up in the latest kind of push over the last few years, you can actually see that's the sales kind of commensurately start buttoning off as well. And that's really that kind of pinch point that we've heard through the analysis work and the other work that you've been updated and briefed around housing pressures. Obviously the affordability, we've got some of the worst affordability in New Zealand, and so that's corresponding with that pressure. Prices going up and obviously sales going down, and then there's alongside that there's the challenges of people getting access to housing as well, and what's being built. So just kind of like looking more on that social side of things and what's going on with other people in the market. This is kind of reflected in the weekly rent levels. Again, the latest results have actually continued that ongoing increase. There's a slight slowing down in 2020, 2021 a little bit, but we're still up now to the highest that we've seen in the district at 584. And you can see some of those increases there on the rent levels kind of correspond with those price levels and the values of housing as a whole. There's a correlation there. And then the last key indicator and finding is around the MSD registrations. And going back to the start of when they started publishing these, we can see again reflecting the rentals and some of those other pressures, there's that continuing increase in registrations. There was a bit of a plateau during some of the lockdown periods here across kind of the 2020 to 2021, a slight slowing down of some of the increases, but the latest couple of results have actually shown that we're back on the increase again. So kind of again demonstrating some of those pressures that we're experiencing, is meaning that there's more people going on the registrations as well. And I think it's in the report, but I haven't highlighted it here. I did a quick analysis. I think nationally that's a similar process, that the registrations are still going up, so that pressure's still there. But I did a quick comparison between Kapiti and the national rate of increase, and ours was almost double the percentage rate of increase is what the national one was. So really, those pressures are really ongoing and still being felt in our district. So very important. So that's the end of the presentation, and hopefully that gives a bit of life to kind of the static numbers. I noticed last time it was at the end of a long meeting and it was a lot of numbers. So hopefully that kind of provides some context that's helpful. And happy to take any questions and provide any further context.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, that was great. Really helps to have an explanation with those graphs. And just some of the questions that popped into my mind as you were giving that excellent presentation is, do we keep track of, say, the kinds of housing that we actually also need in our community, like the smaller bedroom houses? Is that do we keep track of that as opposed to just the whole lot?
We do have that information, and we do use that as part of our HBA analysis. We tend to look at what the projections are going forward, and that's that change in demography and the change in housing needs, and then we can get the information based on that, and we tend to do that analysis under there to try and match what has been built. So we don't necessarily report on it all the time. We could look to flavour in some of that and into. We usually do an annual update. I think it's every September as part of our work, but I guess we did our annualised update as part of the HBA quite recently at the start of the year. So we'll probably look to fold something. We could bring something like that back in later on in the year, or as part of the HBA work that we're actually looking to do the next round of at the moment.
That would be very helpful. The other thing I wondered, as you added in the lines for the lockdown, because they clearly things like that influence what's happening in housing, I wonder whether there are some other lines that you may not want to add in publicly, but I'd certainly like to understand them. Things like the bright line test, when that changed, did that influence or does it coincide with housing sales decreasing because of the economic advantages to wait? Because we've heard politically that if there were a change of government, that bright line test goes back to what the previous settings were. So I'd be interested to see whether there is some alignment, such as there was around the registrations. I don't think I want to comment. Is it appropriate for those real meaty policy decisions that are out of our scope to have a line drawn there or not? I just wonder what the staff think, whether it's appropriate to include that information.
You mean national policy decisions and other market factors? I think previously we have, it's an element of how far we go into the economic analysis. I think we've identified events previously, and I think we may have alluded to anecdotally about some changes around Brightline previously, but it's not something that we regularly are able to break down and compare directly to a range of events. Similar to the GFCs, obviously quite stands off the graph, but we could have a closer look and provide some indications, but more likely as part of an annualised process, because that's when we look at the trend analysis, as opposed to, I guess, the quarterly monitoring is more just looking at the metrics and the numbers, key ones particularly around consents.
Thank you. It's good to understand where those bigger policy decisions affect us locally. The other one that I was interested in was the MSD registrations. If I remember correctly, there was some limitations on what landlords could do to exit people out of properties. Was that taken into consideration when you're looking at those numbers?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I think there were government decisions about not being able to end rentals during the lockdowns when we're going through COVID. Has that been taken into consideration as to why there was that plateau?
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you very much, though.
Right. Anybody else? Councillor Good.
Thanks so much for the presentation. The HBA is always quite a data-rich document, so the presentation was actually really helpful to have some quick snapshots at that. The slide, no need to go back to the slide, but the slide there which had the house prices over the span of years, I was just saying to Councillor Buswell, the blip in 2017 was around the time that M2PP opened. Is there any thoughts around whether the contributors to the upsurge in pricing at that point, and whether it did directly relate back to that? I know it's sort of more anecdotal anecdotal or gut.
I don't think we were able to draw any direct conclusions relating to that. Just going back to some of the work we've done around the housing business assessment, some of the forecasts have always anticipated margins of increase due to improved accessibility, but the ability to kind of directly, I think the best we can do is maybe indicate where some of these things have happened, and they could be causes contributing to change, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
But I don't think getting direct correlation is very, very difficult with some of these things.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly having those significant events like the GFC help paint that picture and I guess to draw your own conclusions. Appreciate it.
Right, anybody else? Nope. Somebody care to move recommendation A? Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Holbrook. Right of intro.
I really just want to say thank you for keeping up this work. Thank you for the excellent presentations. Even if you do fail maths, the way that you explain those graphs is excellent, and it really does help us understand exactly what the pressures are. And I don't think there's any councillor around the room or any member of staff who doesn't understand the immense pressures that are in the housing market and that are being pressured on our citizens because of that. And this just reminds us that we have to keep trying to make a difference in that space. So thank you for the excellent work and thank you for the excellent presentation.
Right, open for debate. Councillor Holliday.
I just want to echo Councillor McCann's words. Thank you, Hamish and council officers, for the additional report that you put on. That was really, really clear, really easy to understand, and I really appreciated the information supplied. So thank you very much.
Right. Nobody else. Recommendation A, moved by Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Holbrook.
And right of reply.
Or right of reply to your own, or
If you
to
haven't,
Martin's.
if to all, it's really an additional thought that I had, which is to the hundreds of people watching, if you haven't filled in the survey on the housing entity, now's the time. You just saw another bunch of evidence as to why we need to do something.
That's a commercial break. Recommendation A, moved by Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Holbrook. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Done? All in favour? Thank you, Hamish. Carried. Recommendations. Just a recommendation to receive the reports from community boards. Any issues with this? Otherwise, can somebody move recommendation A? Moved by Councillor Hanford, seconded by Councillor Holbrook. Right of intro. Right, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you for the long walk. The next is item 11, confirmation of minutes for the meeting of 26 May 2022. Any notes or corrections or anything of the sort? Otherwise, will somebody move that the minutes of the council meeting for 26 May 2022 be accepted as a true and correct record? Oh, Councillor Randall.
Mr. Mayor, I am still around. As regarding the previous paper, I had my hand up. I'm not objecting to what took place, but I still think the way that paper is phrased regarding community boards is kind of detrimental to community boards. It's just a brief. It should be improved. What I'm saying is I like to see that report give more emphasis to community boards and what they're doing than just a brief one sentence. That's all.
Okay. So will somebody move that the minutes of the council meeting of 26 May 2022 be accepted as a true and correct record? Did I hear Councillor Hanford? Councillor Hanford move. Councillor Holbrook. All those in favour say aye. Carried. We now public speaking time for items not on the agenda, not relevant. Public reports. Can somebody move that we move into public exclusion? So moved by Councillor Buswell, seconded by Councillor Holbrook. All those in favour say aye. Carried. We are now into public exclusion. Can you turn off the